act civilized, act kind, act tolerant, because this is the problem with what's happening in the region.
U.S. Envoy Tom Barrack's statements were more than a derogatory bureaucratic rant. They were an overt manifestation of a mindset reflecting a centuries-old colonial legacy. They were also words you wouldn't be surprised to hear from a mouthpiece of one of the nations that thought it could decide who to classify as civilized for centuries. Colonists knew they needed to do more than just go into a country they wanted to invade with guns blazing. They knew dismantling said country's cultural heritage would be essential to their success. In other words, they de-civilized these countries, all in the name of civilization. Des écoles, des chemins, que l'esprit de la France pénètre et imprègne, rapidement soupillé. C'est une question de vie ou de mort pour l'Algérie. There's probably no other statement that better summarizes forced assimilation. Because when France colonized Algeria, it didn't just invade its land. It also replaced the country's education system with one designed to ensure obedience and dependence while maintaining absolute control, all part of a devious colonial scheme. Before it was colonized, Algeria wasn't a country in need of civilization. It had its own thriving decentralized education ecosystem built around madrasas and zawiyas, funded by waqfs or Muslim charities that protected them from political interference. This wasn't a society waiting to be enlightened. On the contrary, it was a hub of education, raising its own thinkers and scholars. Take Bijaya, for example. The Algerian port city is where Italian mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci learned about Arabic numerals and the concept of zero, praising the mathematical precision of his teachers. What Europe struggled to calculate in a page, Algerian scholars solved in a single line. And Fibonacci brought this knowledge back to Europe with him through his Liber Abaci, the book of calculation, based on what he learned in Bijaya, a system that eventually replaced Roman numerals across Europe. The numbering system that built modern finance and engineering and inspired the golden ratio in Renaissance art didn't spread from Europe to North Africa. It spread from Algeria. But between 1830 and 1880, everything collapsed. France didn't try to improve Algeria's schools. It took them apart to subvert and destroy them. Waqf lands were confiscated. Zawiyas were destroyed during uprisings. Teachers fled, were imprisoned, or were pushed into poverty. Within one generation, a system sustained for centuries was in ruins. Entire local tribes couldn't find a single qualified teacher to educate their children clandestinely. In the city of Constantine alone, school attendance dropped from over 300 to fewer than 90 within a decade. This wasn't modernization, it was strategic dismantling. France then launched 3 school models. École française for European settlers, École arabe française controlled with minimal schooling for natives, and Arabic schools under French oversight, underfunded and tightly monitored. The result? By 1890, 84% of settler children were in school compared to only 2% of Algerian children. Algerian kids were also used as cheap labor, on farms, in shops, and in settler homes. The civilizing mission had an economic logic: education for settlers, labor from the colonized. But after decades of land seizures, dismantling of tribes, and destroying of religious institutions, France achieved through force what its schools couldn't achieve alone, deliberately collapsing the indigenous education system so that the French schools became the saviors for Algerians. By the time Algeria finally gained its independence after 130 years of civilizing education, only 5% of Algerians could read in any language. A society that was self-sufficient and had its own dynamic educational world now had mass illiteracy and was left with a system built entirely on French identity and values. And Algeria wasn't the only place where education became a battlefield. Across the world, another empire was running its own experiment in civilizing its subjects through classrooms, and this time on a larger scale, with millions of indigenous people involved. During the early to mid-19th century, the colonizers of the Indian subcontinent faced a challenge. How do you govern hundreds of millions of people without investing in a school system for them? The answer came in one of the most consequential documents in education history, Thomas Babington Macaulay's Minute on Education, published in 1835. In his document, Macaulay dismissed the entire Indian intellectual tradition with one sentence: "A single shelf of a good European library is worth the whole native literature of India." With that worldview, he proposed a new system, a class of intermediaries comprising Indians who had been educated according to the British model. These intermediaries came to dominate colonial administration, law, and higher bureaucracy. British officers documented the scale of pre-colonial education. In Bengal, Scottish Minister William Adam recorded 100,000 village schools in 1820. In the South, the Madras Presidency survey showed lower caste children attending school at higher rates than in England. Subjects included astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, literature, grammar, and logic, and followed an indigenous model shaped by caste communities, languages, and local institutions. Macaulay's reforms turned this world upside down. English became the language of power. Gurukul and madrasas lost funding. Indigenous teachers were sidelined. The British curriculum erased native thinkers like Aryabhat, who calculated pi and proposed the Earth's rotation, Bhaskar, who advanced calculus before Newton, Sushruta, the father of early surgery, Kabir and Mirabai, major literary and philosophical figures. Instead of studying the teachings of these brilliant native minds, Indian children were taught English literature, Shakespeare, Milton, and Wordsworth, British politics and political figures, European histories which described India as backward. By 1870, literacy across the subcontinent was under 5%. One teacher in Calcutta wrote, "We teach children to be English clerks, not educated Indians," which also meant that jobs depended on English literacy, and that was the point. If the British wanted intermediaries, the Americans wanted imitators. After taking the Philippines from Spain in 1898, the US launched one of the most aggressive cultural re-engineering projects in history, and schools became the front line. In 1901, nearly 600 American teachers arrived on the Navy vessel the USS Thomas. Their mission wasn't just to teach, it was to remake the Filipino mind. They introduced US history, civics, and heroes, English-only textbooks, and English as the only language of instruction. One American superintendent put it bluntly, "We are here to make Filipinos into little Americans." From the 16th to 19th centuries, and while Spanish rule remained a colonial system with Filipinos as subjects of the Spanish Empire, literacy in the Philippines during that period was between 20 to 25%, among the highest in Asia. Filipinos had community schools, reading societies, and religious learning centers with literacy in both Spanish and local languages. When the Philippines was taken by the US, their new colonizers replaced the Spanish colonial system with an American curriculum, taught through American textbooks and a centralized US system based on American values and teaching methods. Within 20 years, over 1 million Filipino children were enrolled in American schools. English became the language of law, business, and upward mobility. Filipino elites adopted American political and media culture. Indigenous knowledge systems were labeled backward. Prominent Filipino reformers like Apolinario Mabini warned that the US was creating a colonial consciousness, not an educated citizenry. He wrote, "Education without sovereignty is obedience." As opposed to learning about Filipino culture and history, a Filipino child in 1915 was more likely to study the history of US founding father and first president George Washington and the US Declaration of Independence. Meanwhile, the narratives around national heroes and values were reframed. Polymath Jose Rizal was introduced as a reformist patriot, but not as the anti-colonial revolutionary that he was. The Philippine Revolution in the late 19th century was downplayed. Spanish and indigenous literature disappeared from the core curriculum. The result was a generation that could recite the US Declaration of Independence, but knew little about their own history and struggles for self-determination. By the 1930s, the Philippines had one of the highest literacy rates in Asia, but that literacy was overwhelmingly in English, with Filipinos overwhelmingly brainwashed by American ideology. The US model succeeded where the others failed. It didn't just create clerks, it created Americanized subjects. And when you look at Algeria, India, and the Philippines, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. 3 different empires, 3 different continents, 3 different peoples, languages, and histories, all subjected to colonial strategies aimed at replacing, rewriting, and rebuilding the mind. Each project rested on the same supremacist convictions that Western knowledge was superior, that colonized people were inferior, that education was a tool to make the colonized more useful, not freer. Today, the detrimental legacy of colonized education persists. In India, data from the World Bank show that fewer than 1% of students enter elite institutions that dominate access to top state and corporate roles. In Algeria, national exam systems modeled on France continue to channel senior public careers through a narrow urban educated minority. In the Philippines, labor data from the World Bank revealed that graduates of just 4 to 5 elite universities occupy a majority of CEO, judicial, and senior government posts. Independence may have granted these formerly colonized countries self-determination and political autonomy, but the education systems imposed by the empire still sort and obstruct society.